Welcome to the first edition of Excellent Aviators, the series that takes you into the cockpit with some of the best pilots in the world and brings you expert instruction in all types of aircraft and situations, from single-engine aircraft and warbirds to seaplanes and jets. Excellent Aviators will demonstrate the best ways to handle any type of incident that could occur in the air, including dangerous weather and life-threatening emergencies. We'll help you take your flying to new heights and keep you safe in the process. Nothing captures the thrill and adventure of flight more than backcountry bush flying. These brave pilots bring people and supplies to some of the most remote and beautiful locations on Earth. In this episode, you'll learn from some of today's best bush pilots and find out what it takes to safely fly the backcountry.
I would say for a new bush pilot, the most important thing is not to try to cover too much country at one time. There's so much to see in one place. Keep the airplane light and go half fuel and just go and explore slowly. That would be the first thing I would say to a new pilot coming to this country.
Bush flying carries its own unique risks and rewards. Whether you're landing on a gravel bar, a glacier, a beach, or a mountain ridge, a bush pilot needs expert training, an understanding of weather, experience, and lots of practice.
I've had a lot of time here in Alaska, and I think the one thing that if I can help you survive is you have to stay just a little bit scared.
There's a whole lot of things that dovetail here. There's living in the wilderness, there's flying in the mountains, there's operating your airplane in the air and in this environment. So weaving all that together consciously and thoughtfully to be safe is obviously very important.
Bob Breeden has been a bush pilot in Alaska for over 25 years. He and his son Bobby have had countless adventures while exploring the Alaskan outback together. He knows that bush flying is potentially deadly and requires high performance from both the pilot and his aircraft. He also knows that having the right equipment and keeping his plane light are two of the keys to survival.
The reasons to keep an airplane light are performance and capability, climb rate. When you're working in these mountains, you don't want to have to need 5 miles to clear the next ridge. You want to hammer that thing and just climb well at a rate well greater than the rate of the terrain rising in front of you. That's one. Nimbleness, short takeoff and landings are all dependent on being at lightweight. So minimal weight is just an essential component.
A mistake that new pilots make when flying into the bush, especially in Alaska, is the weather. There are not always weather stations where you're going, and there are not always accurate ways to tell what kind of weather you have. But it is always best to be as informed as possible with the weather around you, know the systems, be familiar with the weather patterns in that certain area. In Alaska, you could be sitting on a ridge, for example, you just landed, there are a few clouds around, but they're miles away, and then within 5 minutes, all of a sudden be socked in with weather on top of you, and there's whenever you need to make the right decision. Some pilots would choose to take off in the clouds and try to descend out off the ridge where they know it's clear. And some would choose to stay on the mountain and wait the weather out. That decision is based on the certain circumstances they're in, but you always want to give yourself options.
Every spring, the most experienced bush pilots in the country gather in Alaska to participate in the Valdez Stoll competition. Participants compete to see who can take off and land their aircraft in the shortest distance possible, simulating conditions that can occur in the bush. At the morning safety briefing, the panel discussion featured legendary Alaskan pilots like Vern Kingsford and Richard Ween.
Just because you got in there a few minutes ago, and just because you got in there yesterday, doesn't mean you can get in there this time.
My dad came up in 1924, and he was a barnstormer in the early 20s with Jenny's. And by the time he came to Alaska, he had over 600 hours, which was pretty high time. And he said, "Bring the airplane home." He said, "Somebody's going to be mad at you because you didn't take off with that load or didn't push the weather, but they'll forget about it the next day. But you hurt somebody, they never forget it. They never forget it. That kept me so many times when I said, do I need to be doing this? Should I be turning around?
One of the most closely watched matchups at Valdez was the competition between Bob Breeden and his 20-year-old son, Bobby. The father-son duo has been training together in their Super Cub for years, and their family ties outweigh even the pressure of friendly competition. This year, Bobby was going for his 4th consecutive victory.
I certainly like to fly around with my dad. You know, he's taught me most of what I know about flying.
I've brought him to a certain point at the basics, and then he's brought me further along because of his youth and his energy and his capability.
The competition at Valdez is a short takeoff and landing competition.
It's a lot of very, very capable guys that fly for a living in their Super Cub, that maybe that Super Cub or that plane, whatever they bring to Valdez, is something that they spend a lot of time working towards. A lot of their personal efforts have gone to learning, to refine their learning, to fly their airplane as best they can.
The pilot will pull up to a chalk line on the runway, and the judge will tell them that their axle's lined up with the line, and they'll give them a thumbs up, and the pilot then takes off in as short of a distance as possible. The distance is marked by the judges. The pilot flies around the pattern and lands, but they have to land on or after the line.
You add up his takeoff distance and the distance from that line to where he stops. Got 2 tries, and that is a very simple test, but yet a very telling one, because it is, I will say, it really shows how well a pilot knows his airplane. Bobby and I have been flying at Valdez for 4 years together. I've kind of coached and he's kind of practiced, and he has gotten first place each time.
He was always there coaching me, telling me whenever we go out and practice how far I touched down from the line, what my approach looked like, what the wind speed was like, what my takeoff and landing distances were like, critiquing me, helping me get better.
He will practice to the point where he's getting that dialed in, where it's consecutive, one after the other, after the other, after the other, and the wind changes, and he still incorporates all that, and he still hits that spot.
This year, we both competed finally at Valdez, and I competed before him, and he was in the next heat. I had a total distance of 116 feet, and then he goes and does this takeoff that is shorter than mine, and then he comes in the competition and does absolutely phenomenal, scoring ultimately only 3 feet longer than what I did. That really got me going. And I'm sitting there watching him fly, and my heart's dropping, oh my gosh, what is gonna happen right now? If he wins, I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Bobby's gotten first. I flew this year and I got second, so I'm happy with that.
Bush flying is all about preparation, judgment, and practice. Before taking off, calculate your takeoff and climb performance. Do not guess. Know the performance of your aircraft and be sure to take in all factors, including the weather. Reduce your weight and make multiple trips if your load is too heavy. Always be aware of how much fuel is on board. Establish and mark a go, no-go decision point for takeoff. Calculate 70% of your liftoff speed. Check your airspeed as you approach the decision point. And if you are less than 70% of your takeoff speed, abort. Remember, you must have 70% of your liftoff speed at this point to clear a 50-foot obstacle ahead of you. One of the most popular bush planes flying today is the venerable Piper Super Cub. Introduced in 1949, the Super Cub is well suited for the modifications that will turn it into a capable bush plane.
Normal Super Cub has a Lycoming 0320, which is 150 horse from the factory, and you can get high compression pistons. It's a STC, and you can take it to 160 horsepower. You combine that with a bore climb prop, and you've got an excellent pulling airplane. It's You can run it all day long, you can run it hard, you can run it, there's fish spotters that run them 3,000 hours or whatever. They'll just keep pulling, they'll just keep running. They're very reliable combination out here. They're reliable in the mountains when your life is hanging on that reliability at times when you're over treacherous terrain. The wing is a high lift wing, a Cub wing. It's the same wing area, same wing profile as a J3 Cub. It's got flaps added to it. Beautiful thing about a Super Cub is there's 2 notches of flaps. Stock from the factory, there's 2 notches of flaps. 1 notch is usually ideal for takeoff, and you can accelerate without the flaps. Pull on 1 notch, your trim speed will be 55 miles an hour. That's an optimum climb out speed. It's a great glide speed for the airplane. Pull 2 notches, flaps go all the way down. Very simple again. That's going to be your landing configuration. It's mostly drag, it's a little bit of lift, but they help you get a more vertical descent into a landing. Say down, to get down, say below treetop height and get down to the ground and land. This airplane doesn't have a starter on it. It's probably 10 or 12 pounds of weight all the way up at the nose. You've heard of nose overs. We don't want weight on the nose. And a starter you only need for that short little bit of time when you're actually starting the airplane. Why lug a bowling ball around with you up there the whole for your entire flight? Clear prop.
So the startup procedures on this Super Cub are different than a normal Cub because we do not have a starter, which means we have to hand prop it. So we richen the mixture and turn the magnetos on, crack the throttle, sometimes give it a full pump, depending on the temperature, lock the brakes, and if we're single pilot, then we stand behind the prop, hold onto the door sill, and pull the prop through until it starts. Whenever it does, we're technically at the controls, and we reach back and adjust the throttle and mixture accordingly. And if we have a second person, then the pilot will stay in the front seat, and the person will prop it from the front, and they'll just stay out of the way as with any other hand propping procedures.
The single biggest contribution to bush flying has been tundra tires, for their added safety, and for the thousands of runways that they open up for a pilot to land on. Alaskan bush wheels come in a variety of sizes, ranging from 26 to 35 inches. For off-airport operations, the bigger the better. With the added weight of bush wheels comes the ability to roll over rough terrain and save the airframe when rolling over unforeseen obstacles. Using a low tire pressure, combined with a large radius, comes the ability to readily absorb impacts from logs or large rocks.
That's a trap, it's not going anywhere.
There are many places that are simply not accessible with anything but 35-inch tires and a big tail wheel. Remember, if it looks smooth, it might be, and if it looks rough, it is.
We just switched over to these 35-inch tires from the 31-inch bush wheels to the 35s. Largely because we can run them at a lower tire pressure. They've got a much bigger footprint, and they've got a much taller sidewall for absorbing the rough in the terrain. They also float a lot better if you're in some water coming up onto a gravel bar. They'll hydroplane at a much lower speed than the 31s. The 31s don't do badly, but you can really get down in the teens as far as water speeds with these, and to be hydroplaning on the things. It's less shock on the airframe to run these. Really don't notice it in cruise speed. Everybody thinks, oh, it's big tires, but we're out there. We want to be able to go as many places as we can, so we're going to maximize everything about the airplane.
Bush wheels allow aircraft to hydroplane on rivers or lakes to achieve a shorter overall landing distance. By transferring some of the weight of the airplane from the wings to the wheels, the plane is able to fly slower to a certain point. The water will hold the plane up to a certain speed. That speed is determined by taking the square root of the tire pressure and multiplying it by 9. With some quick calculations, you can see that planes can hydroplane down to 15 or 20 miles per hour, which gives them much less energy to dissipate in the deceleration phase of landing. It takes a lot of practice to fully understand and implement hydroplaning effectively. The risk of nosing over is rather high if you come in too slow. Flowing water against the wheels also acts like a headwind against the wings by lowering the ground speed of the aircraft. Just like landing downwind, landing downriver is dangerous because you must maintain a higher ground speed to stay on top of the water. The most important thing is to go out and practice. Practice in shallow water that is less than a foot deep because your aircraft is less likely to flip over. The best place to learn is somewhere where the water is clear and the bigger gravel is sticking up out of the water. Finally, try not to let water splash over the wings. It can ruin your propeller and soak your passengers. Knowing your airplane without guessing is paramount. You can't discover your plane out in the bush.
I think the most important thing with this airplane, and the only thing I have forced my son to learn to his core, and he'll tell you what it is. You interview him, you ask him what the deal is. To his core, he will know the most important thing that he's got to do with this airplane every time he flies it, in every situation, is keep the ball in the middle. If he keeps the ball in the middle, that dash right there has got not much on it, but front and center at the top is the ball. It's not down here in the corner above his knee. It's not over here. It is right there. He can fly in any wind situation. He can take off and have wind shear blowing 50 miles an hour across him and just take the plane. As long as he keeps that ball in the middle and that power into it, that plane will just keep flying and keep going up. He may be all over the rudder to keep it there, but if he keeps it there, he's going to be safe. So, what's he preventing by keeping the ball in the middle? He's preventing the thing from spinning out of the sky.
The capabilities of a bush plane means that it is very well suited for extremely short takeoffs and landings, allowing the pilot to land on terrain that no other aircraft could accomplish. With the ability to land virtually anywhere comes responsibility. You must know the terrain, the weather, and your aircraft in order to keep you and your passengers safe. Bush pilots live and die by these rules.
Look the situation over. Take lots of time. Think about the situation. Choose it and make it work.
Operating at gross weight reduces aircraft performance, increases the probability of aircraft damage, and may, in extreme cases, lead to structural failure. Lighter loads are always safer. Fly without passengers or cargo when evaluating a new landing spot. Stow survival gear as far aft as possible to avoid forward gravity, while respecting the weight and balance limitations of your aircraft. Always file a flight plan with the specific locations where you intend to land. This can be with the FAA or with trusted family or friends. Make at least 3 recon passes at different levels before attempting to land. Do not land if you think you won't have enough room to take off again.
I want to go back to why I think I'm still alive, and I'm going to use one word here that I think is very important that you must adopt, and that word is discipline. Every single time you're going to do something, whether you're getting ready to take off or whether you're getting ready to land, you must have this discipline. You don't have to take off. We can stop all the aviation accidents in Alaska. Just don't fly. Not a problem. The thing we have is I teach by rote. They say, well, rote's not a good thing to learn. But if every time you're getting ready to land, you say, where's the wind? And think about it, that's a good thing, but you got to think about it. If I say every time, what's the effect? So in other words, you start out with, where is the wind? A lot of times you don't need a 4,000-foot mountain to have an effect on you. The important thing, I believe, is if you can find a stream and you look at how that water is flowing around the rocks, then you will understand how the air is flowing through the mountain. Another important thing is to practice where you're going to, learn what you're going to do.
Well, as you start getting out of the bush, it's really good to have a buddy pilot with you, another plane. It happens. You will sometimes, have a strip you go to all the time, and the river washed it out differently that year, and there's a log in the way that wasn't normally there, and you hit it. you crack up a prop, and now you got a down plane. And well, if you got a second aircraft in the air, you know, it's pretty easy for him to go back and take care of your parts that you need and make sure you're okay medically. And so I'd advise you fly with somebody.
Whether you are a professional bush pilot with paying customers, or just an explorer like Bob Breeden out to experience the remoteness of the backcountry, the techniques for picking a safe landing zone are the same.
The intrinsic things that a bush pilot thinks about, or gets to the point where it's automatic for them when they're thinking about discerning the viability of a landing spot in the wilderness, the first thing that comes to my mind that you just automatically always have a sense for is the wind. How strong is it? How turbulent is it? Where it's coming from. Where was the wind coming from? 5 mile an hour tailwind versus a 5 mile an hour headwind in a plane that lands around 30 miles an hour is a huge difference in landing roll and landing distance. And also working into that terrain, you've got a lot more maneuvering ability if you're nestling yourself into something, into a headwind. Then there's knowing the wind over ridges, you know, because you're going to have sink on the backside of a mountain. So if you're trying to lay on top of that mountain, you're going to want to come in real high and stay in clean air above the backside of that mountain where it's going to be turbulent. Then launching off that mountain with wind rising up from one side, that's a delightful thing too. So having an intrinsic vision of the wind and the air and its movement is probably the first most primary essential thing. That wing is working in the air. It's not working in anything to do with the terrain. It's working in the air. So visualizing that terrain as if all the mountains were tufted is the first thing that I say has got to be an intrinsic feel for a pilot. Other things that a pilot ought to know is then once you've got your winds figured out and you can make an approach in on something, is to find a way to get down and just fly across it maybe at 50, 55 miles an hour, which in this airplane is 20 miles an hour above its stall speed, and just come down across it as if you would on a landing and then a departure. And if that feels clean and comfortable, then that would be a step towards maybe taking that further. You never have to land. It's just an option.
When trying to choose a landing zone, it is best to make several passes over the terrain. From a high level, check the area from different directions to determine the best landing site in the vicinity. Check wind direction and speed using pools of water, drift of the plane, branches, and grass and dust. If available, use the GPS ground speed as well. Observe the landing, approach, and departure zone while keeping an eye out for obstructions, such as trees and high terrain. On your next pass, fly over the possible landing zone in both directions at an intermediate level. Keep an eye out for possible obstructions. Note the location of the touchdown and rollout areas. Associate landing marks with your landing area to have a good sight picture to be used on final approach. And remember that the time of day is critical. Early morning and late evening shadows will change your sight picture. Always use your best judgment. When you are finally getting ready to land, make a low-level pass to check for objects that can't be seen from directly above. Make sure you are at an angle from the runway, not above it. You want to be able to see the entire landing zone. Remember that certain light can make a bad sight appear good. Each pass should result in you becoming more and more comfortable with your chosen landing area. If you are becoming less comfortable, abandon the site and seek a safer landing area. It's been said that you can never make a good landing out of a bad approach. Here are some useful tips to help make your approach and landing a good one. Maintain normal approach speed and use no more than climb flaps until you're on final. Do not cut the final short. Make a stabilized short field approach. Evaluate your approach and departure path before you commit to landing. Align the approach to the runway, add full flaps, and slow to 1.3 VSO.
Be ahead of the airplane. Know what's going to happen before you ever touch down. Know what's going to happen before you ever start your approach. Have everything in your head.
If you cannot land within one airplane length of your selected touchdown spot, go around and try again. Touch down in tail-low attitude. Reduce all power once your wheels touch the ground. Use minimal braking to prevent damage from the tires throwing rocks into the prop or tail surfaces. Never relax until the aircraft has stopped. The most crucial time is usually when the aircraft is coming to a stop. If the aircraft is decelerating too fast without your command, it could be settling into soft terrain. Be prepared to add power while holding the pitch control all the way back. The airflow from the prop will assist in blowing the tail down to prevent nosing over. The same is true when landing on hummocks in tundra or on a beach. Do not use brakes at this time. It is safer to shut down and get out of the plane to look around at an unfamiliar landing site than it is to taxi blind into an obstacle. After landing, remove any obstructions such as rocks, bushes, or tree limbs from the area that will impede your takeoff. Fill in holes and level off any high spots. Mark the unfixable obstructions with natural materials of a different color. To avoid damaging the propeller, make all turns with minimum power. Never turn from a stop position. Shut the airplane down and then turn it. Also, avoid taxiing downwind on loose gravel or dirt. Finally, do not taxi a loaded plane in loose gravel. Load the plane at the takeoff point. Do not load and then taxi. Landing on gravel bars is one of the simple pleasures of exploring the backcountry. Using the plane's oversized bush tires to land on rough terrain means that an experienced pilot can put the plane down in a very small space. Knowing the wind direction and speed is crucial, as is understanding the characteristics of the gravel landing surface.
Gravel bars are multi-varied, and they can be short, they can be long, they can be big rock, small rock, they can have cuts in them where the waters come. It's really fun just to kind of read it and find places that are like a dynamite spot or maybe a really interesting spot to get down and get touched in right there. It can be fascinating just to work up a river into the wind and just land and go again, land and go again. That's really good practice.
Generally, the darker, grittier stuff is bad to land on. It'll be very muddy and swing mud off the tires onto the wings and into the propeller. And the bigger stuff can be dislodged by the wheels and throw that up and hit your struts and your tail surfaces. As you come into land, you want to make sure that you have your line picked out and your point picked out that you want to touch down at, and if you cannot touch down at that spot or decelerate slow enough, you want to have a point pick that you can go around at. Whenever you come into land, it should be just a normal landing, as would be on smaller gravel or asphalt, and you can come in and land realizing that you will not have as good of braking because the rocks will likely shift under the tires.
We spend a lot of time just practicing. We go out to the big gravel bars out in Connect, and we just spend hours just trying to log as many touch and goes as you can in 5 miles. If you can land 100 touch and goes in 5 miles, or maybe even just try driving your plane like a four-wheeler, for a long period of time. Get used to how these big wheels on these aircraft handle in potholes over big rocks. Just practicing.
Landing on a glacier is another thrill that most pilots never get to experience. For a bush pilot like Bob Breeden, it's all in a day's work, or play.
Glacier flying is really a lot of fun. It's usually pretty remote where you're going to find it, so you're going to have to set up and have it ready. You're going to have to get yourself into the environment. There's going to be a certain amount of travel just to get there. And then the idea is then just to take your time with it and read it and spend some time and look at the light. What time of day is it? How much time do we have left? Are we still fresh? Are we ready to fly this? Are we ready to play with it? And then I'll come right back to it. Say you land on a glacier. Say the winds come up. Say you think you best tie the plane down. We carry ice screws in the plane so we can tie down on the ice. We've also got 6 days left of that 10 days of food. We've got our stove. We can take ice and make water and boil it and make hot soup and be comfortable right there. We got plastic to put under our tent so that water won't come up through and soak us. We could actually spend time there pretty darn comfortable, having hot tea, watching the sun cross the sky. It's having that ability to retain your ability to be comfortable so that you can do this day after day.
The varied and often unpredictable surfaces of glaciers and the unique wind currents that flow across them means that pilots have to make several passes to determine if a glacier is safe for landing.
As you're flying over a glacier, you'll notice that the surface of it is not always the same. Generally higher on the mountain in steeper areas, there will be seracs hanging off the face of the mountains, and they descend down and form a large flat ice sheet that is the main body of the glacier. As it goes over, as the glacier cracks and goes over to steeper sections, it'll generally open up and create what are called crevasses. And whenever it goes into convex sections, the ice will be tighter and is generally more acceptable to land because there are no cracks in it. The ice itself is flowing, and so at the toe of the glacier, depending on what the glacier is exiting into, whether it's a lake or next to a mountain or into the ocean, the face of the glacier is usually calving off, and most places within half of a mile or a mile of the very end of the glacier are extremely crevassed, and you have no hope of landing there.
There's no tread, there's no grip. So maybe you'll find a place on the glacier where the dust is blown off the mountain and you actually can see the grit. See the grit, like this grit here that's on the floor right now. You can see it in the ice. That might be a good little thing to add to your mix so that when you get up there and get stopped, you can actually lock the brakes and have some holding power on the ice.
Understanding different weather conditions is key to flying in the bush. Experienced pilots know that when flying in the mountains, they are likely to experience Katabatic winds. These warm, dry winds are downslope winds that flow from the high elevations of mountains, plateaus, and hills and flow down to the valleys or plains below. Katabatic winds can be dangerous when flying adjacent to mountains or through mountain valleys. These strong downslope winds can easily cause a lightweight aircraft like a Super Cub to lose altitude quickly. Always be aware of the possibility of dangerous weather when flying in the mountains. When landing on bare ice, the pilot must find a spot that has no nearby crevasses or moulin holes. The landing zone must be long enough to stop with minimal braking, as there is little traction on the ice. The texture is important to traction as well. Some glaciers are smooth and wet, while others are coarse and covered in a small amount of gravel. As with any landing, it is important to find a line that has no rocks and has a large enough turnaround zone if the plane cannot be stopped. Oftentimes, it is best to use gravity in your favor, so landing uphill and taking off downhill will produce the most controllable situations. Wind, however, is a big deciding factor in whether or not the landing is possible or not. Landing downhill with a tailwind is obviously not recommended. Most glaciers are sloped, and it is very difficult to outclimb the terrain when doing practice approaches to see if the line feels good. Make low passes down glacier to always have a way out. Touching down on ice for the first time is an eerie feeling because there seems to be less directional control. Remember to fly the plane until it is stopped, because you cannot rely on the wheels to maintain traction. Land on as level a place as possible, because landing and taxiing off camber on ice is a recipe for disaster. Be familiar with downwind takeoffs, because more often than not, the only way off of a glacier is taking off downhill with a tailwind. Steer clear of any crevasses or streams on top of the ice. Depth perception is often difficult to judge when landing in a field of white or blue. Ice screws and a sharp ice axe are mandatory items for the equipment list for tying down the plane and maneuvering on the glacier. Crampons are also highly recommended. If worst comes to worst and the plane starts sliding, have an ice screw roped to the landing gear that you can reach down from the cockpit and cut once the engine is running and you are strapped in. As with any landing area, find a big wide open glacier with no dangerous terrain for your initial glacial operations. When landing on dense snow, you must also realize that the snow may not hold, and the wheel or entire plane could break through the snow layer or fall into a crevasse. Landing in deep, soft snow is usually not possible because of the strong nose-over tendency associated with that much drag on the tires. In the bush, it's necessary to prepare for the unexpected. Whether you have a damaged aircraft or you are pinned down by weather, you will need survival gear to stay safe and relatively comfortable. However, the most important piece of survival gear is the knowledge of how to avoid dangerous situations and how to act when something unexpected happens. Good judgment comes from experience. And experience comes from bad judgment.
Alaska's weather gets people every year, and so there's a lot of people that get caught in bad weather and don't make it.
Bringing the proper survival gear is essential for any backcountry excursion. You never know when weather or a mechanical problem will force you to camp in the wilderness for an extended period.
We're really not sure about an area really far away. It's a long way to get home. We'll normally, before we start coming into an area like this, we'll fly around high, and we're going to look for sources of rescue. A cabin 5 miles out, where is that cabin? And once you're on the ground here looking around, you could walk that way thinking maybe there's a cabin, and it's that way. So, you know, we want to know, is there a boat around, some source to get some shelter, and then, you know, we'll come down in low after we've done scouting the area. And then, you know, you do your passes, and, you know, normally rule of thumb is you start getting in 4 or 5 passes and it ain't feeling right. It's just do it again another day. You know, the winds might not be right that day, sun. There's another day to come do it.
Well, when we go out in the mountains, in order to have the gear we need to, you know, be comfortable out there, in addition to surviving out there, but to be comfortable out there, we look at it as a 10-day camping trip. So I'll take any, you know, food, tent, sleeping bag, water.
In my survival bag, I carry a satellite phone, which is absolutely necessary, many different types of fire starters.
Whatever I'd want if I was just out there hiking and camping and enjoying the scenery, I'd just put in the airplane. And then whether I go in the plane for 2 days or end up staying for 8 or 10 days, I've got what I need and I'm comfortable.
Bush flying makes it possible to explore places that are impossible to reach in any other way. The capabilities of a bush plane open up a whole new world of adventure and discovery. It takes years of preparation, practice, and experience to be able to fly the bush safely, but it can be a life-changing adventure. As with any new flying experience, it is best to learn from the pros. Choose an experienced instructor to teach you the fundamentals of bush flying, learn the capabilities of your aircraft and the skills needed to survive in the bush, and you will open up an exciting new chapter in your aviation career, flying the backcountry.